Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We are your hosts, Steele.
And Teal. Glad you could join us.
It is a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
Yes.
We are relaxing in Steele's office because we're currently changing up our studio.
Right, and so it really sounds much better in his office.
Yes, we're going to continue to make improvements and we're to bring you guys the best show possible. But let's just jump right on in because today's topic is continuing where we've been going this whole season of being a good developer. This one in particular deals with audio and is going to kind of round us around to the finish line for season 2.
That's correct. Yet today's topic is using music in your games.
That's right. Now, we do want to say this podcast is not on how to compose music for your game.
That's right, because we're not composers.
No.
You guys know we're not composers.
Right. We don't have the amazing ability to compose music, but we do have the ability to talk about the theory behind how you use it in a video game.
That's right.
And that's what we're going to go over today. So for those of you who are musical composers, who are musically inclined, we are going to give you the tools you need in order to use the musical ability of yours in your game.
Right, and to use it effectively.
Right. And for those of you who are not musically inclined, how to use the tracks you either commission or download.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right, so let's start with a brief history of video game music to kind of give people some backbone.
Okay. Some background.
Yeah, background.
All right, well, this is going in the Wayback Machine, okay?
Yeah.
The earliest video game music was what we call chiptune.
Chiptune, exactly. Chiptune were like programmable sounds where you'd have something like your Yamaha chip or something like that, and you would just program the sound directly in, and it would make a noise based off of a frequency of the computer speaker.
Right.
You know,
bing, 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 something like that.
Right. I mean, back in old video games like Pong, stuff like that, those sound effects.
Bing.
Right. Each one would have a musical a frequency.
Yes, it would.
So then what they would do is they would use those in a sequence, raising and lowering the frequency, and it would make something that sounded like music. You know, think of Pac-Man. Do 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 do. That's just a series of tones,
right,
with different frequencies.
Simon, yeah. Remember the old Simons?
That was a chiptune.
Yeah, that was a chiptune.
That was chiptune. Now later they used sample sounds, so they would take a sample of like a keyboard,
right,
or a guitar or something,
and play a short tune on it
in sequence. This was something like MIDI.
Exactly. Yeah, we got the MIDI music, and
the MIDI music would sound very toony, very chiptuney.
8-bit.
But then later they would have things like synthesis.
Yeah.
So you'd have like your Sound Blaster cards that would perform a synthesis on those MIDIs and make them sound even better.
Right.
So over time, these would started as doot 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 would actually sound something that was comparable to what your ear would pick up as an actual tune. Now, it didn't sound that great in comparison to today.
No, but if you recall the earliest games from Nintendo, that is a lot of MIDI.
Right. Then we had the advent of CD-ROM.
Ah, the big game changer.
Yes.
So with CD-ROM, you could have fully recorded music.
Yeah, fully recorded music. So you get your band in a sound stage. You could get your orchestra. What have you, and you could have a fully orchestrated soundtrack on CD-ROM. Yeah. And what made that so beautiful was that what was in the artists, the designers' heads, could now be heard. Now, it came with some problems. I mean, let's look at old Sega CD games like Lunar, Sonic CD.
Right.
The track would play, and then you would hear it fade out, and then it would restart.
Yep.
They didn't really have a way, at least at first, to kind of get that to loop properly.
Correct. But then they did.
They did.
Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah. And the
One-Winged Angel.
One-Winged Angel, right. One-Winged Angel is a perfect example of using a CD track to loop properly.
Yes.
Absolutely. And the thing was that was learning how to use MP3 markers. So you like little markers inside of MP3s and other files that would say loop here. And that is used to this day in programs that use things like MP3s and WMDs and the different audio files.
Right.
RPG Maker, MV, and MZ use that.
That's true, they do.
You can put a marker inside your audio file that gives it the loop at the certain point.
Yeah.
So what makes it nice is that now you can do that. And nowadays, game tracks can be fully orchestrated. They can loop indefinitely. There's this, they can even transition properly. I mean, look at games like Nier Automata.
Oh, yeah.
Where you have this beautiful, beautiful music that's playing, like when you're in the city ruins, and it's gorgeous and it's filled with emotion. And then when you hit a part, it fades out one track and fades into the other where there's vocals.
Yes.
So it's two different tracks, but they fade between the two so seamlessly. So nowadays, you could have these fully reimagined, orchestrated tracks that bleed into each other seamlessly. It's chef's kiss.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way.
We've come a long way, it not just the technology for creating and putting these in, but the storage capability as well.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Because it really increases your storage.
It really does.
When you have music in there.
It does. Yeah. Just overall, the experience is considerably better. Play any game that doesn't have music at all, or turn the music off on most games.
Yeah, just turn it off.
And you're going to notice it. There are very few games that I play nowadays that don't have music accompanying. In fact, honestly, Skyrim VR is the only game I play, and Fallout 4 VR, only because the ambient audio is so good.
They put a lot of effort into that, so you don't have to have the musical track playing. But most games, you do need it, because there's a lot of dead air.
Yes, and your atmosphere can only do so much. Also, there are times when just a little bit of music interspersed with a little bit of silence is just as powerful. So we're moving on to the next section. It's important to keep in your mind when to play, when not to play, and how to use them.
Exactly.
All right.
So let's talk about that.
All right, let's
talk about creating your music. Choosing the music is what I should say. Yeah. Choosing your music for your game.
Right, because even if you're creating it, you're still choosing.
Choosing what to put in there.
Yeah. Now, for you composers out there, you're going to want a firm grasp of musical theory, way outside of our wheelhouse. We can't teach you things like rhythm and such like that. That is not something that we can teach you. But if you know musical theory, keep that in the back of your head when you're creating your tracks. Okay.
Right.
All right, so let's talk about the overall issue. This is the big thing that a lot of composers get wrong.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't say composers.
No.
New developers.
New developers.
We'll get this one wrong.
Right, and that is, you need to choose your music based on feelings.
Yes.
On emotion.
It is so oftenly done, and we've seen solo developers do this. Well, they'll go, hey, I need a track for Town 1. I need Town 1 track. I need Battle 2 track. I need Dungeon 3 track.
Right.
And they're like, I just need a track for this dungeon. And what they're not doing is they're not pulling away from the from the visual, from the what it is, to how it feels. These are moments within the game in which you want to invoke a certain tone or a certain emotion.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why we're punching this up over a rocky cave.
Right, because music is emotion based.
Right.
You want to focus on the feeling, the emotion that's evoked when you're going through Town 1, when you're choosing a battle.
Yes.
When you're fighting something that needs a certain battle track.
Right, like Teal said, it's intrinsic. Music came from a very tribal history where we would sit around campfires and beat a drum or chant, or ways to convey what was happening to us.
Right.
So since the very beginning of human civilization, music has been an intrinsic, emotionally based thing.
Exactly.
And you have to feel that.
Yes, you do.
You have to feel that. Now, that doesn't mean that people and things can't have their themes. Always talking about, hey, my main character needs to have his theme, and the love interest scenario has to have a theme. You can do that. But you want to view them through the lens of how to use them. What feeling, what emotion, what are you trying to convey to the audience?
That's right.
I have a good example, too.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Final Fantasy X's Hymn of the Faith.
Ooh, yeah.
That is a fantastic example, and it's used multiple times, too, which is really cool.
Multiple times in different ways.
In different ways, right. but each hymn of the faith, which is a basic theme, it's the na 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 na, which evokes a feeling of sadness and that heaviness of the heart of Spira that has been basically on a death cycle forever.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have this song, this track, Hymn of the Faith, but then each faith has a different iteration.
That's right.
And it goes into the feeling of that particular aeon.
Yeah.
Shiva's version feels different than Bahamut's, than Ifrit's. They all feel a little different. Then you have the ones that play during things like the Sending. You have the version that plays when Spira sings simultaneously to distract Sin.
Right.
Before the final attack on Sin starts. So all of these things, in fact, I believe when you're actually fighting Sin on the airship, I think they actually have the Hymn of the Faith come in every now and then in the background of the battle music, like it rises up and then falls, to show that Spira is singing.
Yeah.
So it's such a strong thing, and it's invoking such an emotion, but it's not just, it's called the Hymn of the Faith.
Right.
The Hymn of the Faith Ifrit, the Hymn of the Faith Spira, but it's the feeling behind it.
That's right. I can think of another example in a different context, and this is in Fallout 4.
Okay.
The Brotherhood of Steel theme.
Yes.
Okay. The first time you hear that in its full version is when the Brotherhood of Steel big airship, the Pridwin, first arrives in the Commonwealth.
Right after you exit fighting Kellogg.
Right.
Yes.
And it is a huge emotional moment because with that theme playing and seeing this huge visual of the Pridwin arriving, and then you hear Maxon's voice giving his welcome speech to the Commonwealth.
Yes.
You have this sense of, oh my God,
right.
The military is here.
The cavalry has arrived, but I love the fact that it's slightly foreboding.
Yes.
Because the Brotherhood's not necessarily a good guy.
Correct.
So you have this kind of, is this what's good for the Commonwealth? Dance loves it.
Of course.
But other people are like, oh shit, there goes the Commonwealth.
Right. So that is an example of having a faction theme be a big part of a scene.
Yes, absolutely. Another good one is the battle theme at the beginning of Nier Automata. We talked about that.
We've talked, yes.
But the one where 2B is going through the factory for the very first time, and they have this very strong, slow music that's really powerful, and it's while 2B is going through the factory, it's playing, but then at certain points when she's getting mobbed by those by those robots, by the machines, it shifts over to the vocal version to show just the depth of soul of this fight. Now, granted, 2B herself is very emotionless.
Right.
But the energy and drive she puts into the fight is represented, along with the soul-crushing plight of humanity. You know, humanity's on the verge of extinction. Spoiler alert, they already are. But the feeling of just that soul-crushing, this is so hard. Like, 2B is fighting and struggling. Each fight is for the glory of mankind. So they have this gorgeous track that shifts to a vocal version, but it's basically called Battle 2.
Right, it's Battle 2, right.
So what you're going to want to do then, developers, is go through your game script, not your dialogue script.
The game script.
And you want to write down those key moments in which something important occurs, whether it be, entering a town that just got destroyed by bandits. So this is not Town 2. This is town that was destroyed by bandits.
Correct.
Going into the factory dungeon. It's not factory dungeon. It's factory where they're constructing the super weapon that will destroy humanity.
Exactly.
You want write it down like that, and you want to then create and choose your tracks to punch up that emotion.
And that's the key. The key is emotion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this also translates over to level music.
Ah, yes. That is the next step.
Yes.
You need your music to feel like that particular level.
Right.
Okay? Whether it is a cave dungeon or going into a town or the open countryside if you have more open world style game.
Absolutely. Think of it now. This is abstract. So take a step back away from the concrete of I need to have a cool track for this level.
Yeah.
And think, how would you hear that if you were walking through? If you're walking through the primeval forest, how would that feel? So take that into account when you're choosing your music, because you're not going to probably choose a dubstep to go through the primordial forest.
Right.
It doesn't really fit. That doesn't mean that you have to choose something that's airy and nature and sounds like, something that a new age band would put together. You don't have to do that.
No, you don't.
But you want to look at okay, what does the level look like? You have those trees that have dense canopies that are literally getting rid of the light. You have foliage on the ground that's so thick you're tripping over it because human feet have not tread on this path in millennia.
Right.
What does that feel like? What does that invoke in you? What are your thoughts? Are you feeling, hey, this would sound dark and oppressive?
Ooh, yeah.
Or would it sound, wonderment and exploration? And you can change that.
You
too.
absolutely can.
So you can have that dark foreboding while you're going through the primordial forest, but then when it opens up and you see the expanse of the ancient temple, then suddenly wonderment.
Exactly. See, and it's all going back to emotion.
Yeah, it's emotion. It's emotion. You should definitely want to punch up those emotions. Final Dungeons.
Ooh, Final Dungeon music.
Look at again, we're talking about Final Fantasy VII because it's such a good example. Judgment Day that plays in the Northern Crater.
Right.
That track is amazing because it sounds like not only this is it. If you don't go down there and destroy Sephiroth, the world is going to be obliterated by meteor.
That's true.
It sounds like we've got to get down there and kill this psycho.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like you're descending. Because you are descending.
You're actually going down. Yeah.
So it's really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And a lot of I hate to punch up Final Fantasy constantly, but Nobuo Uematsu is a goddamn genius.
He is one of the great composers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Study him.
Yeah.
Listen to all of his works. Everything. Doesn't have to just be Final Fantasy. If he's composed it, listen to it. It's so good. Another good example of a powerful dungeon that's not a final dungeon is the Sunlit Waterscape for that little area that Vanille and...
That's right.
Now, it's not Nobuo Uematsu who did that soundtrack, but it's such a good track.
Yeah.
Because it feels the sense of, Vanille and Saz...
And Saz.
Emerge into this place that just feels wonderful, very paradiso. And it's this beautiful music that plays with that vocals.
Yes. Yeah, so, again... We're talking about music that evokes a certain emotion that goes with the environment that works seamlessly. As a side note, I do want to mention that your music does need to work seamlessly together. So a track that you have for a cave needs to feel like it's in the same game as your track with a town.
Yes.
Okay? When you listen to these OSTs of games, you notice that everything works together.
Yes.
To create a satisfying OST.
100%.
So please keep that in mind when you're putting in these different types of music for your games.
Yes.
Let's listen to Jeremy Sewell's music.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, for either Elder Scrolls Oblivion or Elder Scrolls Skyrim. Listen to soundtracks like that so you can get a feel for how to pull things together.
Yes.
How to pull it together.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And remember that every piece of music accompanies other things. Stuff like animation, a voice line, sound effects, environmental effects, key moments in your story. How do those moments feel? How do those moments feel?
Yeah, because a lot of times your music is going to be kind of in the background, supporting the scene, whether it's a dialogue conversation or sound effects when you enter this beautiful primordial forest for the first time. The birds and maybe a jaguar roaring or something like that.
Yeah.
Everything needs to work together. Yeah. So how does your music serve as an accompaniment to the sound effects, to the voices?
Absolutely. And you can also use tracks uniquely. Like you could have a track that is only in one part of the game to really punch up that moment, in which that moment is given a ton of emotion. Like Suke Dena in Final Fantasy X is used, and I'm probably mispronouncing it, just when Titus and Yuna have their love confession and share their first kiss. Right. It only plays that first time. It only plays then. But it brings that emotion up all the way forward, that the culmination of Yuna's sadness and depression, knowing she's going to die. Titus's helplessness of, I want to save you and I love you and I don't know what to do. And then him just saying that, I love you. And Yuna going, my God, in this one moment, I can feel alive. Yeah. And then they swim down and make out. But the fact is that only plays once. At only that one moment. Right. At that one moment. And you can do so much with a track that only plays one time. Yes. I've got an example of it. Different game entirely. Red Dead Redemption. Oh, yeah. When you enter Mexico for the first time. Oh, yeah. Okay, and this is somewhere in the middle of the game. As you're riding along on your horse. Yes. The song Far Away plays. Yes. And it's such a good track. It's very powerful. And the reason that it plays is because John Marston realizes that even though he thought he was at his goal, he is still very far away from it. Yes. He's no closer now to getting his wife and son back than he was at the start. And it is one of the most powerful just soul tracks. I call them soul tracks. Yes, where it's like you look inside the heart of the character. Yeah. You know, that's a very hardened man. He was an outlaw. He was a criminal. Yes, he was. He was a man who killed others without a second thought. And now suddenly this is his redemption. Yeah. His chance at redemption. And I just want my family back. Yeah. And so that track playing is just a very powerful moment. Yes. Okay, so now that you have all of these tracks, you're probably looking at 100 songs. And that's okay, because it's always better to have more than less. Oh gosh, absolutely. You know, you don't want to risk reusing tracks needlessly. No, don't do it. Please don't. That will cheapen your game a lot. Don't say, well, let's see, I have this track, I have this situation here, this dungeon here, this whatever here, that's very similar to this one, but it's really different because there's a key emotion that's different, but it's still a Rocky Dungeon, so I'm going to use the Rocky Dungeon music from earlier. If the emotion's different, don't reuse the track. Please. Yeah. Because that, as I said, that cheapens the moment. Right. But on the same token, let's not overburden yourself with a unique track for every single occasion. Please don't do that. You don't need to. Woo! You don't need to do that. Emotion's more important than occasion. Yes, it is. So unless you have 100 different emotions in your game, you don't need to have 100 different tracks. So that's another thing that we've seen developers do. We've seen developers, especially new ones, either use too few or too many. Yeah. You know, but it is always better to have more. Because if you have more, you don't have to use every single one of them. You know, in fact, some games don't have certain soundtracks in the game, but they put it on the OST. Yeah, absolutely. Unused track. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Yeah. Now, let's get into the using the music in the game. So we talked about choosing. Right. Now let's talk about using. And this is your deal right here, Steele. Right. Because when we were researching this, we read an article that mentions this, and then we were talking, we're like, holy shit, this actually makes sense. Yeah. And that is to view your entire game as an interactive film. That's it. Don't view it as a game when you're choosing and using music. Look at it like an interactive film. So this is a movie. You are using a movie soundtrack in your game. Think of it like that. Yeah. And each track is a piece of that film. Watch the movies with amazing soundtracks. You know, I mean, watch the classics, you know, like Casablanca. Watch the great masterpieces like Spielberg's Schindler's List. Watch anything by the MCU. Yeah. You know, especially Infinity War and Endgame. Watch those. And watch how in each of those key moments, they use the music as a piece. Yes. And then look at how you, with your game, can do the exact same thing. I just thought of just now the Star Wars original trilogy. The Empire Strikes Back. Oh my gosh. Darth Vader appears. The Imperial March. Yes, the Imperial March. And it's so powerful because the moment you hear that, you know that that shit's about to go down. It's going to at least be the Imperials, if not Darth Vader himself, because the Imperial track is eponymous with Darth Vader's theme. Yeah. And what is nice is that, again, that's an emotion. It's an emotion of, oh shit. Fear. fear. We're in trouble because the viewer is supposed to feel the movie through the lens of the rebels.
That's right.
Specifically Luke. And every time that theme plays, the rebels are in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good movie or set of films to look at for the way John Williams composes the music, puts the music in there.
And what I love is that they call forward to it in the Phantom Menace. As many problems as the Phantom Menace has, and Attack of the Clones. Whenever Anakin starts showing his rage, they'll subtly shift it over to a slower version, usually a violin version of the Imperial March.
Yes.
Where it's like, I'm angry, I'm so angry. And then you hear, dun, 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 to show, this dude who we are growing with is going to one day become the most powerful, deadly person in the Empire.
Absolutely.
In the galaxy.
Yeah.
It's just so beautifully done. So each of those musical tracks that you're going to be choosing and using have to accompany some kind of a change.
Yes.
We call them cues. That's what they're referred to in movies as cues. It's a musical cue. So, cue the Imperial March, cue Thanos' theme, the Portal theme.
Ah, yes.
In Endgame, when Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor have had the snot beaten out of them by Thanos, and then Thanos' group appears, and then the whatever those aliens are called, the Chiari, I think, show up, and Sanctuary 2 shows up, and it's like, these three guys are now about to face an army. They're done. And Captain America, it's completely silent as Captain America gets up, his shield's got a huge, dent taken out of it.
Oh, yeah.
He tightens it up, and he's going to face this army by himself because this is Captain America. And then, you hear Falcon's voice, and he says, Cap, to your left, and the portal starts opening, and the music is really slow, really small, really low.
Yeah.
And it starts coming up as Black Panther comes out with Shuri and Okoye, the general. They come out, and it comes and it swells more and more and more as the portals start opening, and here come all the good guys from Nova Force. Here comes the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yep.
Here come the Wakanda army.
Yeah.
Here come the sorcerers. And then, then the people who were dusted come out, like Spider-Man and Star-Lord. And it's just this build, and then the remains of the Avenger base explodes as Ant-Man comes out with Hulk and Rocket. And it's just this, okay, now we're on the same side as Thanos. And it all culminates with, Avengers, assemble.
Yeah.
And at that moment, the music stops. Thor lets out his battle yell, and then the battle music starts as they rush in. That scene is one of the most powerful scenes I've ever seen in cinema, and it's just the cue of this. Captain America standing and tightening his shield. That's the cue.
That's the cue.
That's the cue. So you want to look at in your game those cues. What things happen, whether it be a big thing like Link pulling the sword out of the stone, whether it be a small thing like the hero standing up one more time.
Yeah. Those
are the cues you need to look at, developer. Speaking of cues, if you're going to use them, you gotta learn them, and the best way to learn cues is to play games.
Right.
Play games with those legendary.
Legendary soundtracks, like Nier Automata.
Oh god,
Xenogears.
Xenogears is amazing. That game uses cues perfectly.
Yes.
And the soundtrack itself is amazing. The Metal Gear Solid series.
Oh, hands down. Metal Gear Solid. Yeah.
They are a master of musical cues. Actually, the Mario series and the Zelda series. We just mentioned the Master Sword. Both of those use cues very well as well. And even though it's an MMO, Final Fantasy XIV.
They do cues correctly. Yes. A lot of MMOs don't.
Right.
This one does.
So listen to those soundtracks and listen how they work. Most of the Final Fantasy games in general, especially if Amatsu made them, are going to have that, but this particular one is really good. Final Fantasy VII Remake, we're always talking it up. That one uses musical cues just perfectly.
That's you still.
I love the game.
You love it.
I love the game. But once you've chosen this music, you've inserted this music, etc., you need to start replaying your game.
Now comes the hard part.
Yes.
You're going to get so sick of hearing your music in this game, but developers, you've got to do this. You have to replay your scenes, your games, multiple times.
Yes, just for the music. Just for the music. So you play it for content. You play it for writing. You play it for audio cues and sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
You play it for level design. You play it for bugs. Play it just for the music.
Yep. You need to take note of all those cues and the musical changes that they invoke or fail to invoke.
Right. Is this what you want the player to hear and feel at that moment? If your character's walking out of that forest and viewing the temple of the ancients where their destiny arises, are you giving the right feeling with the music?
Right.
Because if you're keeping that forest theme and they're looking at the temple, is that how you want them to feel?
Is that how you want them to feel?
If you don't feel just by listening to the music, turn off your sound effects.
Yeah, turn off the environment.
Turn off the environment. The only thing you want to hear is the music. Do you feel what you want to feel and what you want your players to feel? Does it invoke the emotion you want? Because if it doesn't, then change it, kill it, whatevs. To kind of sum all it up, as we said earlier, music is intrinsically emotion-based.
Yes, it is.
So if your music isn't making your players feel, then that music doesn't belong in your game.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, so now it's time for us to take questions from our live audience.
And remember, if you've been watching, use the podcast question feature in our chat.
What I absolutely love is how music in general, even if the music itself is very simple or very simply done, like chiptuning.
True.
It can still evoke emotion. Look at Undertale.
Okay.
Megalovania, the music that plays when you're fighting sand during the genocide run.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, do. I mean, it's literally like it's not a chip tune, but it's a MIDI. It sounds like a MIDI, but it invokes all of this emotion that you, not Frisk, are feeling.
Yeah.
But that San is feeling. Because, San was your buddy. He was laid back. He was chill dude. And then, in the genocide run, he's the last thing stopping you.
Yeah.
And, he's still laid back and he's kind of shrugging during half the fight until he does a superpower and you see the rage on him as he slams your cursor around. And that's what Megalovania feels. It feels like that desperation. San's desperation, I've got to stop you because you are the monster.
Yeah.
And it's just so freaking powerful. I guess I should have said danger spoiler for Undertale. The game's been out for a while. I don't feel like
it's been out for
yeah. I guess if you're listening to DLC not included, you need to be ready for spoilers of any games that are more than 5 years old.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very powerful track, and Megalovania has been used multiple times by multiple people.
It has, yeah.
So and I don't mean like in their games. I mean like remixes. It's given a metal remix. It has a violin remix. It has tons of remixes because it's such a powerful, strong track.
Right.
And it sounds like a MIDI back from the 80s.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So
its use is what's important.
Right. And that is the beauty of it. Okay, I am not seeing any questions. Are we seeing any questions, Teal?
I do not see any.
Yeah. All right, so we can start to wrap things up then.
Okay.
I think that this was a very good one. We have one.
Okay. Our question is from Burncastle Witch.
Okay, cool.
Burncastle says, what would your thoughts be of individual themes for bosses and whatnot? For example, FF14, Tenho, Dead Rising, etc. In their opinion, those do give a vibe and personality to a boss who may not be in the game for long. But what do you think of that use? Okay,
let's use FF14 as an example, because even though we don't play FF14, a lot of our friends do, and we're very familiar with the soundtrack. All right, first off, can you, the developer, afford that? If you can afford it, then consider it. But you want to use it if each individual boss's theme evokes the emotion of that boss fight.
Correct.
It's not so much, okay, so boss A has a theme, boss B has a theme, boss C has a theme. Don't do that. Just have a boss theme.
Right.
But let's say that boss 1 has a feeling of sadness. Another has a feeling of betrayal. Another has a feeling of rage. And you don't have to go FF14. Let's go down to like a level with a game that has like 5 bosses. Metal Gear Solid 3.
Okay.
Snake Eater.
Right.
Each one of the different cobras, the fear, the fury, the sorrow, they all have different themes. And they all have very different music, but it's the emotion of that boss.
Yes.
The sorrow is one of the best examples. You don't really fight the sorrow so much as you go through a trench where the ghosts of all the people you've killed throughout the game are attacking you. And it's a very deep, emotional, sad track because the sorrow represents the sadness of those who die in war.
Right.
Then you have the fury, the guy who's like on fire.
Right.
And he's literally, it's a hard-hitting soundtrack of you fighting some dude who's literally filled with rage.
Yes.
The end is very, the guy at the end, the sniper, it's very subtle, and because you're fighting him in a sniper fight. So basically each of those bosses, there's a different feeling, a different emotion. So yeah, different boss music in that situation is perfect.
Right. However, on the flip side, if you have a great, 5 or 6 or 8 bosses, whatever, mini bosses, then you can use the same track.
Yeah.
I personally would say vary it up a little. One boss would probably have more violin feel, or another one would have like a more pipe organ feel. But I would suggest, you can use the same theme track, but maybe vary it up a bit.
You could do that too.
Just to show that each boss is different. This is a different person you're fighting.
No, the mini bosses and the dungeon bosses, like the regular bosses in Final Fantasy XIV have that. They have like dungeon boss music, mini boss music, that kind of thing.
And that's fine, yeah.
It's the big bosses, the story bosses that have their individual tracks, and each one of those tracks feel like that boss. So again, in that case, kind of marry what Teal and I said.
Yeah.
If your boss is just a generic boss, if there's no emotion behind it other than they're an obstacle, vary up your regular boss music. Give it some variety. But if the boss itself is a story boss, if it represents like the end of something, give the emotion of that boss.
Then you definitely need to have an individual theme track for that boss, that fight.
Okay, we have another.
Oh, this question is thank you, Burncastle. That was a really good question.
Very good question, Burn. Very good.
Our next question comes from Gallus99X. What are your thoughts on Octopath Traveler's music? The music arguably built on and exceeded what Uematsu did for RPG music. Characters have their own instruments, and there are unique cues before boss fights no game has done before. An example, and they give a
right to
a URL
I can't
to an
stop
example.
Thinking,
Yeah.
All right, so quick disclosure, quick disclaimer. We have not played Octopath Traveler, but we've listened to the soundtrack. I specifically use Octopath Traveler's OST in the tabletop RPG that we play every Saturday because it's such a good one. So the basic thoughts on the soundtrack, not the game, because we've never played it, is that it is an extremely good idea. Everything is cue-based.
Yes.
Everything is cue-based, and those cues are what give it that emotion. So, my favorite boss fight, my favorite boss music ever for any final boss, arguably in the top 10, if not the top 5, is the final boss music against like the goddess character. I used her as the final boss for a first campaign.
Yes.
It's that, dun-dun-dun, dun-dun. It's such a good track. So, in general, because Octopath Traveler is so cue-based, yes, 100%.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and each character has their own track that feels like them. And that's, again, it's the emotion.
And so Octopath Traveler is a good example.
Yes, and you're going to put
that.
You're going to put a lot of work into that.
Yes.
A lot of work. If you want to do something like what Octopath did, expect to spend a lot of time either creating music or commissioning someone. You're not going to get Octopath Traveler, you developers, buy a music DLC track pack that you download.
No, you're not going to get that.
You're not going to get that. That's very customized because most things that you can download off the internet, paid or unpaid, are just a collection of tracks. So that was a very good question, Gallus.
Yes, it is.
And I would like to see more RPGs and more video games in general do that. Just like I would like to see more RPGs do what Nier Automata did, where Nier Automata has 2 versions of every dungeon track, the non-vocal and the vocal. And the vocal fades in whenever something important's happening.
Yes.
And then fades out when it's just 2B running around. Which, by the way, that is a technique that anyone can do in just about any engine that can play 2 tracks simultaneously.
Yes, absolutely.
It's really simple. Like you would have your track, playing without the vocals, and at the same time you would have your track with the vocals playing. They're the exact same track with the exact same loop markers. You just have the vocal track all the way down at 0 volume, and the other one all the way up at 100 volume. And then when you need to seamlessly switch, you just one goes up, one goes down.
Yeah.
So if you're using an engine that can play 2 soundtracks or 2 audio tracks at once, you can do that.
Yeah, and that is highly recommended.
Yeah. So good question from both Burn and from Gallus. Very good questions. I'm not seeing any more, so we'll kind of start wrapping things up. If another one throws out a question, that'll be cool. In general, guys, if you're doing anything audio-based, especially something like music, get used to listening. The ear is important. Train your ear.
Agreed.
But both Teal and I, independent of each other, took classical music in college.
Yes.
And learned to hear. Mm-hmm. So if you can take a classical music course, even something like a master class or like any kind of online class that trains you to hear, do that.
And I also have the added advantage of I took a classical ballet for many years.
Yes.
And dancing to classical music, it trains you to listen to the music and move with the music.
Yes. So all of those things help. By the way, classical music is actually a perfect way to train your ear because it was used so mathematically. Use like your Baum, your Bach, your Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky. If you listen to those tracks and you really listen, don't just take the first few times and absorb the awesomeness, but then sit back and really listen to how the music's composed.
Yeah,
it will help you pick out the different ways that those musical notes layer on top of each other.
Yes.
All right, so I'm not seeing any more questions, so we're going to go ahead and end this podcast.
Okay, yeah.
Any final thoughts, Teal? Are you good?
My only final thought is to expose yourself to as many types of music as you can.
Yes, absolutely.
Don't get stuck in just one or two genres.
Please.
Listen to all types and genres of music.
Yeah, even ones you wouldn't normally think of. Even American pop. Because maybe every now and then you'll find something that like really goes, and speaks to you. And I think that's kind of the thing. If the music speaks to you, then that's all that matters. Yeah. All right, so we want to thank our live audience for listening. We want to thank for the very thoughtful questions. We also want to thank anyone who's listening to us VOD on YouTube or Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, etc., etc. You guys are what make DLC Not Included and this podcast so much fun.
Thank you very much for your listening and your support.
All right, so join us next time on DLC Not Included. And remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.